Welcome to WikiPodcast. Today, in our series exploring psychology and basic emotions, we're tackling a really big one. Fear. The emotion that, well, keeps us alive, but can sometimes feel like it traps us too.
It's a fascinating topic. Fear is just so fundamental, isn't it? That jolt, the worry.
Yeah,
It shapes so much of our lives.
absolutely. And everyone experiences it differently, right? Different triggers, different intensities.
Exactly. So today we're doing a deep dive. We want to unpack what fear really is, look at its roots biologically, psychologically, based on some great overviews of the research.
Our mission really is to understand why it's such a big player. How it helps us, but also how it can hinder us
Right. So let's start with the basics. What is fear, fundamentally?
at its heart.
Yeah. Well, essentially, it's that unpleasant emotion we feel when we perceive danger, some kind of threat. It's like our built-in alarm system.
An alarm that kicks off a whole chain reaction, physically and mentally.
Precisely. It triggers immediate changes. Think about the classic fight or flight response.
Right. Everyone knows that phrase. But what's actually happening in the body then?
Okay, so when danger hits, the body mobilizes instantly. Your breathing gets faster hyperventilation sometimes.
To get more oxygen in?
Yep. And your heart rate shoots up. Blood vessels might constrict in your arms and legs, pooling blood more centrally. Pupils dilate, maybe to see better.
Wow. It's like flipping an emergency switch.
Totally. And there's more subtle stuff, too. Muscles tense up, you might feel stiff or get goosebumps.
Piloerections.
Right. You start sweating to cool down for potential exertion. Your liver dumps glucose into your bloodstream for energy.
Instant fuel.
Even your blood chemistry changes slightly more calcium, certain white blood cells. And that feeling, butterflies in the stomach, that's dyspepsia, another common response.
It's incredibly coordinated, all happening at once.
It really is. It's all geared towards preparing you to either confront the danger or, well, run away.
And these aren't just internal feelings, are they? You can often see fear on someone.
Oh, definitely. Someone might feel dizzy, lightheaded, maybe feel like they're choking,
Yeah.
profuse sweating, shortness of breath, sometimes even nausea or vomiting,
Yeah.
numbness, shaking. These are all outward signs.
Signals that the body's alarm is ringing loud and clear.
Exactly. It's saying, deal with this threat.
Okay, so we have this automatic system.
Yeah.
But what actually flips the switch? What kinds of things trigger fear?
Well, researchers categorize triggers in a few different ways. One angle is just the sheer intensity of something like a sudden, really loud bang.
Makes sense.
Another is novelty, encountering something completely unfamiliar or unexpected.
Right.
Then there are what are sometimes called special evolutionary dangers.
Yeah.
Things our ancestors probably had to worry about constantly, like predators.
Snakes, spiders, that kind of thing.
Could be. Social interactions can also be a trigger, think. Fear of rejection, public speaking.
Oh, yeah.
And, of course, we learn to fear things through experience. Those are conditioned stimuli, like a specific place where something bad happened.
So intensity, novelty, maybe ancient dangers, social stuff, and learned triggers. That covers a lot.
It does. Other researchers might emphasize slightly different things, like physical pain as a trigger, or frustration when you can't reach a goal.
Okay.
And there's this idea of looming, something coming at you fast. That seems pretty primal.
Like a ball flying towards your head.
Exactly. Another way to look at it is more functional, like distinguishing between predator cues, sudden movement, being too close, versus environmental dangers like heights or deep water, or situations that just feel risky, maybe being alone in a dark open space.
Yeah.
And distinguishing between things that seem universally scary, perhaps due to evolution, and things that are unpredictable, learned fears.
It seems like there isn't just one neat list. It's complex.
Very. But a key distinction runs through all this. The difference between fears that seem almost built in and those we acquire.
So nature and nurture again.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
The capacity for fear is innate, definitely.
Yeah.
But many specific fears are learned. However, there's this concept of preparedness.
Preparedness. What's that?
It's the idea that we seem biologically predisposed to learn certain fears more easily than others. Fears of snakes, spiders, heights. These pop up commonly across cultures and seem easier to condition in labs.
Why would that be?
Well, evolutionary psychology suggests it's survival advantage. Early humans who quickly learned to fear snakes or dangerous heights were probably more likely to survive and pass on their genes.
So our brains are kind of pre-wired to be sensitive to ancient threats.
That's the thinking. Some even suggest different types of fears evolved during different eras of our past, corresponding to the major threats of the time,
Like fear of heights being an older mammalian thing, maybe.
potentially. And fear of disease-carrying critters like rats becoming more relevant later.
Yeah.
And then there's how we learn specific fears in our own lifetime fear conditioning.
Right, you mentioned that. Associating something neutral with something bad, like the little Albert experiment.
Exactly that classic study. Pairing a neutral stimulus, the white rat, with an unpleasant loud noise, led the baby to fear the rat.
And didn't the fear spread?
It did. He became afraid of other furry things too, like a coat. It shows how easily these associations form and also how fear can generalize, which, sometimes helpful, sometimes not.
Yeah, you don't want to be afraid of everything white and furry.
Right. And importantly, we don't just learn from direct experience. Witnessing trauma or even just seeing someone else react fearfully can teach us fear.
So observing fear is enough.
Research shows it can be. Activity in the amygdala, a key fear center we'll get to, ramps up even when we just watch someone else in distress. Social learning of fear is huge.
Wow. And culture plays a role too.
Absolutely. Think about collective fears, like during a pandemic, say polio in the past. What scares a society changes. And how we express fear can also differ culturally. Display rules, they're called.
Okay. And sometimes these learned or perhaps innate fears become really intense and focused, right? Phobias?
Yes. Phobias are intense, often irrational fears of specific things or situations that pose little real danger.
What are some common ones?
Well, surveys often list things like demons or ghosts, more supernatural fears, but also cockroaches, spiders, snakes, heights, water, enclosed spaces, tunnels, bridges,
The classic.
needles, social rejection, failure, exams, public speaking. And you see regional variations too. Fears related to terrorism, war, violence might be higher in certain places.
And what about just fear of the unknown? That vague, anxious feeling.
That's a big one. It often arises from negative thinking patterns, underlying anxiety. Your mind fills the void with worst-case scenarios.
Yeah, that sounds familiar.
And even though it's irrational, it can activate the same fear pathways in the brain, mobilizing the body's resources as if there were a concrete threat.
So it feels just as real physically.
It can, yeah.
Oh.
And if it becomes chronic, it's really detrimental, strongly linked to anxiety disorders. It can paralyze you, leading to worry instead of planning.
What makes someone prone to that kind of fear?
Ambiguous situations can trigger it, especially if past experiences, maybe difficult parenting, have eroded self-confidence. Developing equanimity, that sense of inner calm, is seen in some philosophies as an antidote. Some think fear of the unknown might actually be one of our most fundamental, earliest fears.
Okay, so fear is triggered, the body responds. How does this translate into behavior? What do people do when they're afraid?
Behavior varies a lot, but you often see two main patterns. Avoidance, or escape getting away from the threat, and immobility, like freezing.
Just stopping dead in your tracks.
Exactly. But there's more. Sometimes, if cornered, an animal or person might show threat displays or even attack. There are protective reflexes like startling or flinching from a looming object. Some animals defensively bury threats. Social responses are key to alarm calls, submissive postures. Even freezing isn't monolithic. There's a difference between freezing alertly and a deeper, rigid state called tonic immobility.
Like playing dead.
Sort of, yeah. It's a whole repertoire.
A toolbox of survival reactions. What determines which tool gets used?
It's a mix of things. How scared are you? Is there an escape route? What's the threat? Like fast, slow, big, small.
Right.
Your own condition matters too. Size, fitness. Are you alone or in a group? And crucially, have you encountered this kind of threat before? Experience shapes the response significantly.
That makes sense. It's all incredibly complex. Let's dive into the brain's machinery now. What's going on upstairs?
A lot of what we know comes from animal models, especially rodents. Using techniques like fear conditioning, researchers map the brain circuits involved in learning fear and also in unlearning it, or extinction.
Okay.
These studies highlight something called species-specific defense reactions, or SSDRs. These are basically innate, pre-programmed ways an animal reacts to danger, flight, fight, freeze.
The built-in responses we talked about?
Exactly. They're controlled by the sympathetic nervous system, often learned quickly through social cues or context, and they tend to stick. Think about instinctively jumping back from a stick that looks like a snake. That's likely an SSDR.
A rapid automatic reaction.
Yes. And the amygdala, this almond-shaped structure deep in the brain, is absolutely central to all this. It's like the hub.
Fear hub.
Pretty much. It communicates constantly with other brain areas, the prefrontal cortex for decision-making, the hypothalamus to trigger hormonal responses, sensory areas, memory centers like the hippocampus, the brainstem. It orchestrates the whole response.
So it receives threat information and sounds the alarm.
Essentially, yes. It's crucial for associative learning, linking any neutral cue with danger and initiating those SSDRs via the sympathetic nervous system.
What happens if it's damaged?
Damage can impair recognizing fear in others' faces and even reduce one's own fear response. People might become overly confident, take more risks. It really shows how vital it is.
Wow. So these SSDRs are pretty hardwired.
Robert Bowles's work suggested they are intrinsic, often triggered more by safety signals or lack thereof than just punishment. Rats run from shock, pigeons flap their wings, they have these default escape routines. Pavlovian conditioning often taps into these pre-existing responses. And Michael Fancel's research showed these instinctual reactions can sometimes trump context. Put a rat back in a chamber where it's shocked, it freezes. Even if the shock setup isn't there anymore, the instinct takes over.
It's all about survival.
Absolutely. Survival and fitness. Genes are involved too, like one called Staffman. Mice lacking it don't learn avoidance behaviors properly. And importantly, fear learning isn't static. It changes across our lifespan as the brain, especially the prefrontal cortex and amygdala, develops.
Fascinating. Are there other specific brain areas that light up when we perceive fear, say in someone's face?
Yes. Sensory input, say from your eyes or ears, goes first to the thalamus, the relay station, then to the sensory cortex for interpretation, then signals branch out. Hypothalamus for fight or flight.
Right.
Amygdalae, there are two for the emotional fear processing, and the hippocampus to lay down the memory context.
So the amygdalae are really central command for fear learning and stress adaptation.
You could say that. They trigger hormone release, adrenaline, cortisol via the hypothalamus, putting the body on high alert.
And memory. How does that work?
When the danger passes, the amygdalae and hippocampus interact with the medial prefrontal cortex, MPFC, to consolidate the memory. The hippocampus stores the what, where, when details, while the amygdala tags it with emotional significance. This was scary. This involves synaptic plasticity, strengthening connections between neurons.
Which can sometimes go too far, leading to PTSD or phobias.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The fear memory becomes too strong, too easily triggered. Brain scans like fMRI often show larger or more reactive amygdalae in people with anxiety disorders.
Interesting. And you mentioned pathogens affecting it.
Yeah, toxoplasmosis, carried by cats, can actually suppress amygdala activity in rodents, making them less afraid of cats, which helps the parasite spread.
That's creepy.
It is. And again, lesions or damage to the amygdala can lead to a lack of fear, risky behavior. Besides the amygdala, looking at fearful faces activates visual processing areas and regions involved in interpreting facial features, like the eyes and mouth, which convey a lot of emotional information.
And hormones can influence this too, like oxytocin.
Yes, oxytocin, sometimes called the love hormone, seems to dampen activity in the brain's fear circuits. It might play a role in social bonding and reducing fear.
Okay, this brain circuitry is incredibly intricate. Now, you mentioned pheromones earlier, these chemical signals in animals. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Many animals release alarm pheromones when threatened. These airborne or substrate-borne chemicals signal danger to others of the same species conspecifics.
Warning signals.
Exactly. And they trigger behavioral changes like freezing or scattering. This has been studied in ants, worms, mice, rats. A long history of research.
What kind of effects do they have?
Well, smelling stressed rat odors can actually reduce pain sensitivity in unstressed rats, possibly via opioids. Bee alarm pheromones do something similar.
Wow.
Researchers identified mammalian alarm substances using tests like forced swimming in rats. These substances tend to be species-specific and not very volatile, meaning they linger.
So they stick around to keep the warning active.
Potentially. There are also links found between these alarm chemosignals and the immune system, even the pituitary gland. And different body regions might release slightly different signals. Pheromones from a rat's face might trigger behavioral changes, while those from the anal area might trigger more of an automatic stress response.
So it's quite specific.
Perceiving them increases defensive behaviors, makes rats jumpier. There's even a link suggested between severe pain, neuroinflammation involving cytokines, and the release of these pheromones.
Where in the brain are these signals processed?
The neural circuit seems to involve ancient structures already implicated in fight or flight. Hypothalamus, brainstem, amygdalae.
The usual suspects.
Right. And this pheromone-induced anxiety in rats is actually used as a model to test anti-anxiety drugs, anxiolytics. Several have shown effects.
Interesting. So understanding this helps develop treatments.
Potentially. And things that impair smell, like deficiencies in certain enzymes, can mess up pheromone perception and related behaviors like aggression or mating.
Okay. What about social buffering?
Ah, that's the phenomenon, where the presence of friendly individuals can actually reduce the fear response, even to alarm pheromones. It's seen in rats, even honeybees. It might be mediated by other kinds of chemical signals, maybe social pheromones.
So social connection can literally calm fear chemically.
It seems plausible. Some researchers even think fear pheromones could be keystone molecules, having ripple effects through whole ecosystems.
That's a big thought. What about humans? Do we release fear pheromones?
It's still debated, but the evidence is building. We haven't pinned down a specific human alarm pheromone, but compounds in sweat, like androstenedione, are candidates.
Sweat.
Yes. Studies show people can differentiate sweat collected during anxiety from exercise sweat. And crucially, smelling the anxiety sweat can increase the startle reflex in others, even if they don't consciously detect an odor.
Subliminal fear signals.
Seems like it. There's also evidence for empathy induction. Literally smelling anxiety might make you feel more connected to the fearful person.
Wow. Any gender differences?
Some studies suggest yes. Female fear-related sweat might elicit stronger arousal in other women, linked to right amygdala activity. And experiments using androstenedione, while people view facial expressions, suggest it might prime the fear system and affect how we process faces.
So below the level of conscious awareness, we might be communicating fear chemically.
It's a really intriguing possibility. Still lots to learn, but it hints at another layer of social connection.
Absolutely fascinating. Okay, shifting gears slightly, what about the cognitive angle? How do our thoughts and expectations fit in?
Right. Cognitive consistency theory offers one perspective. It suggests fear arises from a mismatch, an inconsistency between how we want or expect things to be and how we perceive them to be.
So when reality doesn't match our model.
Exactly. And the fear behavior, fleeing, hiding, is seen as an attempt to remove that inconsistency, to restore balance.
Okay.
This theory places fear alongside other drives like curiosity and aggression. Small inconsistencies might spark curiosity, leading us to learn and update our expectations. But larger mismatches, those might trigger fear, motivating escape, or maybe aggression, trying to change the perceived situation forcefully. If escape is blocked, aggression might become more likely.
So our brains are constantly comparing reality to expectations, and big deviations can trigger fear.
That's the core idea. It highlights the role of prediction and sense-making in our emotional lives.
And to study all these facets, the biology, the behavior, the cognition researchers rely heavily on those animal models we mentioned.
Yes, translational models are indispensable. Besides basic Pavlovian fear conditioning, pairing a neutral cue like a tone with a shock,
Right.
there are models using more naturalistic threats, like predator odors or actual predator exposure, to induce psychosocial stress. Others look at chronic stress effects or model PTSD using single, intense, multifaceted stressors.
Like mimicking a traumatic event.
Sort of, yeah. There's also inescapable shock models, immobilization stress, and models looking at how a single major stressor can make an animal more susceptible to fear learning, later stress-enhanced fear learning.
So many different ways to induce and study fear states?
They let researchers pick apart the mechanisms of fear acquisition, how fear generalizes, how it can be extinguished or unlearned, how cognition regulates it, and how fear memories can be updated or reconsolidated over time.
They're powerful tools, clearly. Now, when fear becomes problematic, like in anxiety disorders or phobias, how can it be managed?
There are pharmaceutical approaches. For instance, glucocorticoids, the stress hormones, affect amygdala activity during fear conditioning. Blocking their receptors might prevent conditioned fear from forming, although that's complex.
And psychologically?
Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, is a cornerstone. It involves carefully guided, repeated exposure to feared situations or stimuli in a safe context.
Exposure therapy?
Yes, the goal is to gradually weaken the association between the trigger and the fear response, essentially suppressing the fear memory. It's highly effective, especially for specific phobias. Another related technique is systematic desensitization. It pairs relaxation techniques like deep breathing, muscle relaxation, with gradual exposure to the feared stimulus, aiming to replace the fear response with a relaxation response.
Retraining the association.
Exactly. Beyond formal therapy, simple things can help too. journaling rational thoughts about fears, or creating a fear ladder, ranking fears from least to most scary and tackling them step by step.
Practical strategies.
And for some, religious faith and practice offer significant coping resources for managing fear and anxiety.
It's good to know there are effective pathways to manage debilitating fear. But what about the opposite extreme? Is it possible to not feel fear at all?
It's extremely rare, but yes. Certain conditions, like the genetic disorder Urbach-Wiethe disease, can cause calcification and damage specifically to the amygdala.
Which we know is the fear hub.
Right. So individuals with this damage can show a remarkable lack of fear. There are only a handful of well-documented cases, but they're incredibly informative.
What's the consequence of not feeling fear?
It can be dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Without that internal alarm system, people might not recognize threats or react appropriately, putting themselves at significant risk. It really highlights the protective value fear normally provides.
It's a stark reminder of its evolutionary purpose. Okay, let's zoom out now. How does fear ripple through society and culture?
Oh, profoundly. Take the fear of death. It's universal, and cultures throughout history have developed rituals, belief systems, philosophies to grapple with it.
Mm-hmm.
Terror management theory suggests that our cultural worldviews, religion, values, national identity act as buffers against the terror of knowing we're mortal. They provide meaning, symbolic immortality.
A psychological defense.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Interestingly, people who feel their lives have been meaningful often report less death anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
And death anxiety isn't simple. It involves fear of the process of dying, fear of the unknown, fear of loss.
It's multi-layered.
Definitely. Philosophers like Shelley Kagan have explored the nuances. Is it rational to fear death itself, or just the loss of life? Research also links low self-efficacy or low spiritual belief to higher death anxiety in older adults. The role of religiosity is complex. Some studies find intrinsic religiosity is linked to less fear of death, but the findings aren't always consistent.
So culture helps us manage this ultimate fear, and religion specifically.
Well, there's the old idea, fear first made gods. But within many religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, for example, fear often means something more like reverence, awe, piety, obedience. God-fearing implies devotion, not just being scared.
A different kind of fear, more like deep respect.
Exactly. But fear can also be weaponized, sadly.
Politically, culturally.
Yes. Fear is a powerful tool for manipulation. It can short-circuit rational thinking. When people are afraid, they crave safety, making them more susceptible to messages or leaders who promise protection, even if those promises are baseless or manipulative.
Playing on primal instincts.
Politicians sometimes use fear-mongering to rally support or demonize opponents. It highlights the need for critical thinking, especially when emotions run high.
Definitely. How is fear reflected in our stories and art?
It's everywhere. Mythology, folklore, fairy tales are full of encounters with fearful creatures or situations. Dystopian fiction, post-apocalyptic stories, these explore collective societal anxieties about collapse, loss of control, the future.
The fear of the world's end is an old theme.
Very old, though its expression changes. Used to be more religious, now often incorporates scientific or technological anxieties. Think about fairy tales like the youth who went forth to learn what fear was. The very absence of fear is the central plot point. Or modern examples like horror podcasts exploring fear archetypes. Even visual art, like the Japanese kawaii or scary pictures tradition, shows our long fascination with depicting fear.
So stories and art provide a space to confront and explore fear safely.
I think so. They let us process anxieties, maybe gain a sense of understanding or even mastery.
Okay, one last area. Athletics. Seems counterintuitive, but how does fear figure in sports?
Fear of failure is huge in sports. It can be a motivator, pushing athletes to train harder, but it can also be crippling.
Performance anxiety?
Exactly. It starts as a cognitive worry, what if I mess up? But can quickly trigger the physiological fight-or-flight response, affecting coordination, decision-making under pressure. Sports psychologists have studied this extensively. Early theories identified fear of failure as a core motive. Later work, like Lazarus's cognitive motivational theory, links it to an athlete's beliefs about the negative consequences of failing.
Like what kind of consequences?
Things like experiencing shame or embarrassment, letting down teammates or coaches, having doubts about their future prospects, feeling like they disappointed important people, or feeling less self-assured overall. So fear of failure in sports is really about anticipating these negative outcomes.
It's intense.
It can be. Phenomena like the yips, that sudden unexplained loss of skill, are often linked to this kind of performance anxiety.
Hmm.
But you also see incredible stories of resilience, like athletes overcoming slumps or setbacks, which offer hope.
Wow. Fear really does touch almost every aspect of our existence, doesn't it? From basic survival to the highest levels of performance and culture.
It truly does. It's this complex double-edged sword, deep biological roots, but profoundly shaped by learning, thought, society. It protects us, but it can also trap us in anxiety.
So considering its purpose, its malleability, it really makes you think, doesn't it? How can we as individuals get better at understanding our own fears? How can we navigate them so they serve us rather than limit us so we can live more fulfilling lives?
That's the crucial question, isn't it? Recognizing its value when it's appropriate, but learning to manage or overcome it when it holds us back unnecessarily. Finding that balance.
This has been incredibly insightful. Thank you for breaking down such a complex emotion with us.
It was my pleasure. A truly vital topic.
Thanks for listening. Write us in the comments your opinion on the episode and what other topics you would like us to talk about. Subscribe to the channel to help us reach more listeners. Thank you and have an amazing day.